You don't fall in love by accident. The most intense encounters in your life, the ones that feel impossible to explain, are not coincidences. There is an invisible reason behind every person who crosses your path. And that reason has nothing to do with luck, destiny, or chemistry. Psychology understands this phenomenon. There is a hidden mechanism silently operating behind your romantic choices. It determines who you are attracted to, who you get involved with, and most importantly, why you keep repeating the same patterns even when you know they will hurt you. In this video, you will discover the truth behind impossible encounters. You will understand how your unconscious influences your relationships and why certain types of connections awaken parts of you that you didn't even know existed. These encounters are not really about the other person, but about something within you that still needs to be seen, healed, and integrated. If you have ever felt that an unexplainable force is pulling you toward people who seem wrong but awaken something you cannot ignore, then this video is for you. There is a deep psychological explanation for this, and once you access that knowledge, everything changes. Because from that moment on, love stops being a space of repetition and becomes a territory of transformation. Stay until the end, because after today, you will never love the same way again. If this message has already made you reflect, imagine the impact the rest of this video can have on your life. Subscribe now to the channel to keep receiving content that not only informs, but transforms. And if this has already touched something inside you, leave a like so YouTube knows this kind of message needs to reach more people. Rick met Lori on an ordinary night. There was nothing extraordinary about that moment, but the connection was instant, almost electric. They talked for hours as if they had known each other for years. In no time, they were inseparable. It felt like the universe had conspired to bring them together, but what seemed magical soon became confusing. Lori was intense, unpredictable, sometimes affectionate, sometimes distant. Rick, on the other hand, did everything to please her, to keep the connection alive, even when it hurt. He told himself she was special, that their relationship had a deeper purpose, that it was true love. But deep down, something inside him already knew something was wrong. Every time she pulled away, he felt an old pain, something familiar, like reliving a wound that had never healed. And still, he couldn't walk away. The more she slipped through his fingers, the more he held on, as if her absence activated something in him he didn't even know was there. It wasn't just about losing someone. It was about losing himself. Rick couldn't understand why he felt so attached to someone who clearly couldn't love him consistently. He thought it was his fault, that maybe if he changed, if he were better, calmer, stronger, more of anything, then she would stay. But this wasn't the first time. Before Lori, there had been others. Intense relationships full of highs and lows, with people who awakened in him a love so overwhelming and at the same time a pain so unbearable. He believed that loving meant losing himself in the other. Until one day, everything collapsed. Lori disappeared without warning. No message, no explanation, just silence. And in that silence, Rick finally saw himself. And what he found was frightening, because he realized that what hurt wasn't just her absence. It was the constant presence of an old wound he had never truly faced. He began revisiting moments from his childhood. He remembered trying to be the perfect son for an emotionally distant father. He remembered never feeling good enough, carrying in silence the idea that he had to earn love. And then, everything made sense. Lori wasn't just Lori. She was the reflection of a pain he had been carrying for years. She activated a part of him still seeking approval, acceptance, belonging. Rick realized he wasn't in love with the woman in front of him, but with the chance to finally heal something inside himself. This is the invisible trap of impossible encounters. They don't happen by chance. They are invitations, mirrors, portals. And if you don't understand what is being activated within you, you'll keep believing it's about the other person, when in reality, it was always about you. Most people believe they fall in love because of compatibility, chance, or destiny. But the truth is, the unconscious mind is always searching for something familiar, even if that something is pain. What feels like love at first sight is often just your emotional system, recognizing patterns you lived through in childhood. It's not your heart choosing, it's your wound. And it has memory. It knows exactly what kind of person will trigger that old feeling of abandonment, rejection, or invisibility. And like a magnet, you are pulled toward it without realizing. You think you're following your heart, but you're just following a script written long before you understood what love even was. With every relationship, the story repeats itself, with different faces. You get involved, you give your all, you try to fix, to save yourself. But the ending is always the same. Frustration, anxiety, a constant feeling of not being enough. And the more you try to make sense of it, the more stuck you become. Because this isn't a logical problem. It's a deeply rooted emotional cycle. Psychology calls this attraction based on insecure attachment. These are bonds that don't connect, they chain, where love stops being a choice and becomes a compulsion. A silent impulse pushing you to relive what you were supposed to have outgrown. But there's something even deeper happening. Carl Jung said that everything you deny within yourself, you end up projecting onto others. In other words, what attracts you the most in someone might be exactly what's missing in you. That's why the connection feels so intense. Because that person isn't just charming you. They're revealing a part of you that was forgotten, rejected, or repressed. That's why certain relationships feel so magnetic. Not because they're healthy, but because they touch your shadow directly. And the shadow doesn't like to be ignored. It creates situations, encounters, and coincidences that force you to look within. And if you don't understand what it's trying to show you, you'll keep believing the problem is the other person, when in fact, it's the mirror. But this is where everything starts to change. When you realize that the love you're searching for outside must first be accessed within. When you understand that it's not your responsibility to heal the other, but to heal the part of you that still believes you need to be hurt, to be loved. And this is where the real transformation begins. It's not about stopping love. It's about learning to love without losing yourself. It's about breaking the cycle and stepping into a new state of awareness. And at the center of this process, there is a key that almost no one talks about, an invisible but essential piece that can completely change the way you relate to others. It is directly connected to how you see yourself. And once you discover this, the entire dynamic shifts. The pain stops being a cycle and becomes a portal to what Jung called individuation. The process where you stop seeking wholeness in someone else and start becoming whole on your own. But that key is still hidden, and in the next few minutes, it will be revealed. Carl Jung was one of the first psychologists to claim that we don't fall in love by chance. According to him, our most significant encounters, especially the painful ones, are living reflections of the unconscious. When you feel deeply drawn to someone, it's not just chemistry, it's projection. You're projecting onto the other parts of yourself that you haven't yet recognized, accepted, or integrated. Jung called this anima and animus, the unconscious feminine side of a man, and the unconscious masculine side of a woman. When someone touches that hidden part, the impact is magnetic, but also dangerous, because you're not falling in love with the person. You're falling in love with a part of yourself that was activated through them. But this wisdom isn't only found in depth psychology. Buddhism has taught for millennia that everything you attract is a reflection of your own mind. That attachment comes from the illusion that something outside of you will fill what is missing within. Taoism speaks about the balance between yin and yang, and how we unconsciously seek what we believe we lack. In Kabbalah, there is the concept of tikkun, a kind of spiritual correction. According to this tradition, every relationship is a carefully placed opportunity in your life to reveal internal flaws that need healing, not as punishment, but as evolution. Modern science also confirms this view. Research in effective neuroscience shows that the brain forms emotional bonds based on childhood experiences. Children raised in unstable environments often develop anxious attachment systems, and these patterns remain active into adulthood. This means you may unconsciously feel attracted to people who trigger the same emotional cues from your past, even if those cues bring pain. Because to the brain, familiarity feels like safety, even when it hurts. And that's why so many people stay stuck in the same type of relationship, thinking they're experiencing love, when in truth, they're just reliving pain. But now that you know this, an inevitable question arises. If all this happens unconsciously, how can you break the cycle? How do you access those deep layers of the psyche and create a new emotional reality? The answer is closer than you think. But first, there's something you need to understand about your own self-image. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. There's an invisible detail that sustains the emotional patterns you keep repeating. A silent, subtle, but incredibly powerful element. And most people go their entire lives without realizing it's there. This detail isn't in your behavior or your conscious choices. It lives in the image you hold of yourself. Jung called this the idealized self. It's the version of you that you believe you must become to be worthy of love. The problem is, that image was often built not on truth, but on pain. It's a reflection of the rejections, silences, and criticisms you received in childhood. Maybe you were told you had to be strong all the time, or that you needed to please others to be accepted. Maybe you learned that feeling too much was weakness, and little by little you shaped yourself to fit in. But fitting in is not the same as belonging. When you hide parts of yourself to be loved, what you receive isn't true love, it's validation of your mask. And that mask attracts relationships that don't nourish, but drain. Relationships that feed your wound instead of healing it. And even after therapy, reading books, or understanding your trauma, the pattern stays. Because the unconscious doesn't change with logic. It changes through experience. It needs to live something new, to build new pathways. But how do you create a new emotional experience when the world around you remains the same? The answer lies in a step that is as simple as it is powerful. A step most people overlook, but one that marks the real beginning of transformation. This step has nothing to do with finding someone else. It has everything to do with finding yourself again. With looking at the shadow you've tried to hide for so long. With embracing parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. Because when the unconscious is integrated, it stops screaming. And when it stops screaming, you stop searching outside for what has always been within. But here's what almost no one tells you. Even after beginning this process, there is a second cycle. A new challenge that only appears once you start becoming whole. And it's even more subtle, more dangerous, more decisive. And in the next part, you'll discover exactly what it is, why it appears, and how to move through it with awareness. When you begin to access this new inner space, something changes in a deep and irreversible way. The connections that once seemed irresistible now start to lose their shine. That constant anxiety for approval begins to fade, as if something inside you starts to fill the space that once felt empty. And this isn't poetry, it's neuroscience. Your brain is literally creating new emotional roots, new neural connections based on safety, no longer on survival. This is what experts call emotional neuroplasticity. And it's at this stage that you begin to experience the true benefit of self-knowledge, emotional freedom. Rick, that man who at the beginning of the story was stuck in cycles of romantic frustration, went through this process. And the transformation wasn't instant. It was silent, gradual, almost imperceptible at first. But one day, he noticed something simple, almost trivial, but extremely symbolic. He was alone in a cafe, reading a book, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. It wasn't a fleeting euphoria. It was a comfortable silence, a kind of presence with himself that he had never experienced before. And in that moment, Rick understood that he no longer needed someone to complete his world, because he had become his own world. That's when things start to change from the outside in. You begin to set boundaries with clarity. You start saying no without guilt. You begin to recognize when you are being manipulated, even in subtle ways. And most importantly, you start choosing yourself. What once seemed impossible now becomes natural, because your emotional system is no longer operating from the wound, but from the healing. You stop romanticizing toxic intensity and start desiring stability, consistency, and truth. What once seemed boring, like a calm love, now feels valuable. And what once made you chase after it now repels you. Because you are no longer the same person. But the transformation doesn't stop there, because when you become whole, you unlock a new stage of the journey. And this is where most people stumble again, even after so much growth. A silent dilemma appears when you finally meet someone healthy. And it's subtle, almost imperceptible. But if it's not understood, it can make you sabotage what you waited for the most. And that's exactly what we'll talk about in the next chapter. Because self-sabotage doesn't come from the hate you feel toward yourself. It comes from the love you never knew how to receive. And there is a way to reprogram that, starting with a single gesture. A gesture that might seem small, but holds the power to change everything. There comes a moment in the inner journey when you realize that the whole path you've walked wasn't about finding someone, but about becoming someone. Someone capable of loving without fear. Someone capable of being seen without hiding. Someone whole. But it's precisely here, at this turning point, that the greatest test arises. It's not the test of loneliness, nor rejection. It's the test of presence. Because when someone finally shows up who doesn't trigger your wounds, but your peace, something inside you feels strange. It's too calm, too light, too real. And your emotional system, still used to chaos, might want to run away, might question, might doubt. And it's here that many people return to the old cycle, because they confuse love with adrenaline and peace with boredom. But there's a secret that separates those who break the cycle from those who repeat it. And that secret lies in a type of awareness that only arises when you stop seeking love as medicine and begin to live it as a choice. No longer as an escape, but as an extension of who you are. And when you access that place, the relationship stops being an emotional transaction and becomes a spiritual co-creation. It's no longer about filling the other, but about sharing your own abundance. And it is in that space where impossible encounters become real. But that awareness doesn't arise on its own. It needs one last element, a silent emotional code that few know, but that is present in all conscious love stories. A code that not only defines who you attract, but who you allow to stay. And that code will be revealed in the next video. If you felt that this journey touched you on some level, subscribe to the channel now. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Because what's coming can completely change the way you love, connect, and see yourself. If this journey awakened something in you, don't let it fade when the video ends. Subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell to receive the next episodes of this inner transformation. Leave your like to support this project and share it with someone you know needs to hear this. Sometimes, a single message is all someone needs to change the course of their story.